All right, good morning, and welcome to our NetSuite Simplified webinar series, where we take one NetSuite topic each month and break it down and simplify it. And this month, what we're talking about is WIP and routing. So there's a lot of pieces to cover for today, and we've got Jamie, an expert in the area, to take us through it. So there definitely will be a lot of content. What we ask is that you guys interact with us. Some of the best parts of these webinars is being able to do the Q&A at the end. So as we get time, as you get time and you're listening, and if you've got questions, post them in the GoToWebinar. There's a little chat feature or question feature that you guys can use, and we'll get to those at the end. So there's a couple of slides before we jump into it. The first one that I'll talk about is what we covered last month, and that was all about bill of materials. If you guys recall, if any of you guys were on that webinar or watched the recording, Renee took us through accurate BOMs, some of the mistakes that we see quite often, and advanced bill of materials. So this is kind of a stepping stone from, or that was a stepping stone to WIP and routing. So a lot of what we covered last month will come into play today. And the recording is available. So if you guys missed out and are looking to get caught up, you can reach out to us at NetSuite Simplified at goVirtualOffice, and we'll make sure you get that recording. And then the next is just some simple introductions. For those that have attended a webinar in the past, my face might look familiar, and same with Jamie's. I'm the Director of Managed Application Services, and one of the things that you guys will see, for those that have been following these webinars, we went through a recent structure change at goVirtualOffice. It's all very exciting. And so one of the things that we'll talk about towards the end is, I was previously the professional services manager supporting business consultants and application consultants. Going forward, I'm going to be helping deliver Boost, which is our managed application services, so in consulting. So there's more that we'll talk about that at the end. We're kind of revamping our support to be able to be more proactive, business first. So a lot of exciting things that we'll talk about. But again, welcome to the webinar. Mark Miller. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jamie Strike, Director of Client Success here at goVirtualOffice. So what that means is if you reach out to us and you're looking for additional licenses for your account, you're looking to kick off projects, you're looking to buy Boost, you might be, net new logo where you're looking to implement. My job is to basically help you with all those sorts of initiatives. It's not just myself, but my team. And so really the goal with my role is to interact with you, find out what your business needs are, figuring out, okay, what's in the near term, what's in the long term, and helping to find what that stairway means so you guys can have an accurate timeline, budget, and expectations. So that way GVO can be a good resource to help you maximize your investment that you made in NetSuite.
All right, and then one more slide, and then we'll get into the agenda for today. So why goVirtualOffice? And some of you guys have seen this slide before, but we want to just give everyone an idea of our scope of work and who we are at GVO for those that are attending for the first time. We are a full-service NetSuite solution provider, so we do implementations, we do recovery and rescue, custom development, Boost training and support. We'll talk more about that too towards the end. So all the way from getting into the system and to your continued support, we've got a really experienced team all across different industries and functional areas. So we've got senior consultants with 15 plus years of experience. And that's really important to us from our hiring pattern, to bring in those that are experienced. And of course, we've done tons and tons of implementations. In terms of our NetSuite expertise, quite a bit there. We've been a top NetSuite partner for 15 plus years, 5-star partner. We have tons and tons of certifications throughout our team. Of course, that is very important to us to be able to put our knowledge to a test. And then we've got a proven process. So we've been doing this for quite some time, and over iterations of implementing NetSuite across different industries, we learn quite a bit. And so we take those learnings and we standardize them, quite much like probably your business operates today too, right? You guys learn from what you've done in the past, and you make it better. So that's definitely the steps that we take at GVO. And then the last one, just national recognition. I mentioned Partner of the Year. We were Suite Success Partner of the Year in 2019, which is really great. That's one of NetSuite's more newer methodologies for implementation. And of course, 5-star for about 6 consecutive years. So we try to keep pushing that. And the last thing I'll mention is we have a close relationship with NetSuite. So one of the advantages that we have is that with that relationship is being able to work with them on new functionality and new things that are coming out in each one of their releases. So that's a little bit about GVO. And then we can go into, Jamie, I'll pass it off to you to talk about the agenda and jump into WIP.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Mark. So I don't know if I mentioned it during my introduction, but prior to coming to GVO, my background was in manufacturing and distribution. So this is something that very much take to heart. And really the goal of today is I'm just trying to make sure that you guys have some education in terms of what WIP and routing is, the elements that make up WIP and routing, and kind of some of the misconceptions that come along with WIP and routing. All right, so benefits of WIP and routing. So the idea of WIP and routing is that you are a client and you have a process that you're trying to follow where you need something more than just work orders and assemblies. So work orders and assemblies in NetSuite is basically saying, okay, I'm taking these raw materials and now at this point in time, they are now this finished good. Kind of hard stop at that point. This is the idea that, okay, now I have something that's a little bit more robust and I want to get better at how I'm costing that, and then also how I'm planning for the raw materials that go into that, and then also outlining those steps and getting those overheads in there. So you're trying to add more data, you're being a little bit more thorough in terms of what you're doing. So the idea is you're having multiple steps for these assemblies. The idea is after you save a work order that you have WIP, what's going to happen is in NetSuite, you're going to have operational tasks that are created. And it's almost like if you have any familiarity with the project module in NetSuite, that's what's going on. Is that it's saying, okay, this person is completing this task. I'm assuming it's going to take this long at this cost. And then the idea is if you have multiple steps on that complex assembly, the idea is a specific area that is essentially the first one. So for example, the receiving aspect of things could be first, and then you might have like a pre-press activity or some order activity follows after that. And the idea is each one of those groups can see the tasks that are coming up for them, and then also ones that they've completed. So it kind of narrows down their focus and scope of what they need to work on. A lot of times that's where we'll do custom searches and reports to massage that and get it to display in a way that leadership or floor supervisors want their team to interact with those records. This also with WIP and routing, you also have the idea that you can have progress. You can record that at each step. There's a lot of benefits that I'll touch on with that, but each step can say, this is how much time I spent on receiving for this portion before they hand it off to the pre-press. And then also if they have any inventory that they used, they can also then allocate it and log it against that job at that point. They don't have to do everything all at once. Okay. With WIP and routing, you also have the idea that you can have overlap. So for example, say the first activity takes a very long time to complete, but the second activity, they can start up right away once they start getting material coming their way. NetSuite allows you to then set up that lag accordingly. That lag, you can do it based on quantity, time, percentage. It's really specific to what you want to do. Or if you don't have anything, you can also allow lag to be auto-calculated. So NetSuite is going to do that by just basically figuring out what's the shortest possible lead time for each work order. You also have the ability to then view the individual operational task list by a specific work center. And again, I mentioned that before, that is essentially each step along the way, they can get a filtered list of what their tasks are that they need to do next. I'll thank Chrissy, our marketing person, for adding in memes for me. I did this on my first webinar and I really enjoy it. So you guys all have to put up with my childish nature. So a little bit of Devo for everyone. Next time I'll have to figure out how we can insert a little bit of audio with this too. I think that'd be appropriate. Of course, they'd probably charge me for the license on that. All right. One of the other benefits that we have as it relates to supply is with supply planning. So this is where, depending on your lead time on your components, this can be a huge gain with WIP and routing. What this allows you to do is, say you have a manufacturing process that might take you several days to complete. Maybe you have to have curing, or maybe you have a machine that's just identified as a bottleneck. Well, if you're able to issue components to a job prior to that whole job being done, that gives you back those days, and it allows your team to do a better job of planning out those supply plans. So, for example, I have a long process that it takes me 7 days to manufacture, but you know what? I also need another 3 days from my vendor. This allows you to play with that time by issuing those components to the job in advance, and it allows then your planning team to have more visibility so they can get that replenishment going. So supply plans in NetSuite, they're going to use the backward scheduling method based on when the work order due dates are. And you can, again, same as before, you can have that lag time incorporated in there. NetSuite is going to then take your lead time across all those sequences. Okay, the task records that I mentioned on the previous slide, that's going to basically say what needs to be done for this work order on this step, when does it need to be done. You know, it gives you visibility to how much has been done, how much remains to be done. And I'll touch on all this in a little bit. I have some of the screenshots available so you can kind of at least get the visual of what I'm referring to. Also, going through here, just making sure I have all my talking points. Again, I'll issue raw material against a work order so you can trigger that resupply of components. And another big benefit here is for your finance department. So usually when people have like a bill of material or just work orders and assembly functionality in NetSuite, they don't always have a very strong way of seeing, you know, if I need to apply overhead to the costing on this, how well do I do it? A lot of times it's just a generic, okay, add an extra 8% or a flat fee onto that. And usually it's just kind of a gut reaction that like at the end of the month or maybe at the end of the year when you're doing budgeting, you adjust what that number needs to be on the bill of material. With the WIP and routing, you're able to assign those costs much more accurately and really get a true understanding of what your margin is once you start to incorporate those things. So for that reason, you know, it allows you to get better at tracking time, get better at costing for your overhead, and again, it's just a good benefit to improve your accuracy and kind of take it to that next step. Okay, right here I included a slide that if you go into Suite Answers and you look around, this is what NetSuite has, and I think it's a good visualization of what this process is doing. Is it's basically taking my raw material, any of my service time, any of my labor time, overhead, machine hours, machine overhead, is putting that all into your finished good. So again, this is just highlighting the fact that your accuracy on your costing, inventory management, time management will improve by adding WIP and routing to your work orders and assemblies process. So I'm a big fan of Dumb and Dumber, so this one really resonated with me. So hope you all enjoy that one. What is WIP and routing? Okay, so trying to get into the definition, show you all the components that are going to make up WIP and routing. So just to get it out there, WIP and routing is basically the ability to allow inventory to exist in a partially finished status. So it's no longer raw material that I ordered from my vendor, but it's not, I can't sell it yet. So it's this in-between phase. That's what this is allowing. Routing is basically the ability to schedule and record manufacturing activities against a work order that has different teams at different work centers working on it. For everyone that is in NetSuite, just as a heads up, if you only have work orders and assemblies, this is an additional module that you would have to purchase. And the other thing that I want to make sure that I call out is just as it relates to naming conventions. So NetSuite also has an additional module above and beyond this, which is called advanced manufacturing. That includes things like finite scheduling, quality management module. This is not that. So just so you know that there's a differentiation, there's basically 3 levels of manufacturing in NetSuite. You have, you know, work orders and assemblies, WIP and routing, and advanced manufacturing is the end. All right, so in NetSuite, for those of you that are in NetSuite, you understand that there's usually a pattern to how NetSuite operates. Usually it starts off with master records, playing with transactional records, and costing is getting incorporated into that. And so this follows a very similar design. So you essentially have these different elements that are coming into play as it relates to WIP and routing. You have cost categories, manufacturing charge items, you have your cost templates, the actual work centers, work calendars, the routing, work orders, and then the work order close. And I will show you those individually here right now. So your cost category, this is essentially a list value where you're just saying, this is what I'm doing. So for example, here I have a cost category of machine overhead. and what is my cost type. It could be a machine setup, it could be a machine run. And what happens then is you have that element that's basically saying what it is. Then you have a manufacturing charge item, where this is where you're setting up a new item record, and you're defining what that cost is and the expense account that you want to charge against. So in this example, if you guys are familiar with NetSuite, you have on your purchasing tab, this purchase price, it's per hour. And you have this designation down here where I just got to move my element there, it's in my way. You have your identifying that it is a manufacturing charge item, which allows it to be selected in future steps. And then over here is where you're setting your expense account that you want it to be mapped to. So then what happens is when you have those two data elements, you pull them together to create a manufacturing cost template. So this is what I was referring to earlier, where now I'm getting a little bit more specific. So for example, here's just my name. And then down here, this is where I have my cost categories that you guys saw earlier. Here's my item that I just showed you guys. And then over here is where you're able to determine, okay, what's my fixed rate? So what's my, for every job that I run, I'm incurring X. And then also, what is my per hour run rate? Again, all of these are building off of each other, so I apologize if I'm becoming repetitive, but you'll kind of see how this all comes into play. So once you have those elements, then you need to basically define what the work center is and when it's available to process and order. So for this one, you have to come into NetSuite. You're going to have a work calendar. We're going to define your start time, how many hours a day that work center is available. You have over here then the idea that you can set what days of the week they're available. And then also you have your non-working days. I didn't provide a screenshot of that, but that's essentially your holidays. So, if you're closed on Thanksgiving and Christmas or what have you, that's where you're adding those data points in there. Then once you have that defined, you need to go in and you need to create an actual employee group. So we've defined when the work center is available. Now we're defining who's available on it. And with this, you can have it be a static employee group, or you can also have it be dynamic. So if you have a safe search that you want to pull values into that on that employee group, so you'll notice here, I have my header information, and here's my employees that I mentioned before. And over here, there's another tab. It's called Manufacturing Work Center Settings. And this is where you have to add just a couple of things. So you're adding in that work calendar that I mentioned just previously. You're also adding in how many labor resources are part of that center, along with any machine resources that you have available. Okay, now that I've defined, okay, this is how I want things costed, these is my work calendar, now I'm actually to the point where I'm building out the steps that I have. So in this record, I'm actually creating my routing. So if you notice up here, you're defining your bill of materials, your location. NetSuite has the ability that you can have different routes by location. So depending on the size of your organization, and say you have one facility on the West Coast, one facility on the East Coast, and their machines aren't exactly the same, but you're still producing the same finished good for your clients. This allows you that flexibility to, by location, define how you're manufacturing that item, and also then gives you the flexibility with costing. So down here on the routing steps, you'll notice then that you have your sequence of things as you're going. One big call out to people as you're creating these, make sure that you have a numbering sequence that gives you space to add steps at a further point in time. The reason I say that is I'll have a lot of clients that this will be a net new ask for them, and their first version of this won't be the final draft. It's not, stone tablets coming down from a mountain. They're going to evolve over time. And if you lock in this operational sequence, it creates a lot more headache, and it's just harder to update at a later point in time. So just please don't do that. And you're going through here, you're also defining the operation name. So this is more or less, what is the team out on the floor? How do they refer to what that step is? Usually that's the nomenclature I advise. Here's that work center that we already spoke about. Here's where it's pulling in my resources that I just showed you on that employee group. And then here's my cost template. And then here's where I'm setting what is my expected, setup time, and then my run rate. So basically, how long does it take to set up this machine? And then once I have it set up, how quickly does it go through? On the routing then too, you'll notice here I just switched over. So here's the first subtab, here's the second one. This is where you can set which component or when a component gets consumed by a job. So this is in NetSuite then, as the employee is working with this record, you can basically make it, have a settings to say, on this step, you need to enter in how much of this item that you consumed. It's not a requirement, but it is an option. And doing so is right over here. You just have this drop down arrow. And if you were to click it, that drop down arrow would just show you the steps that were in this, were in this previous slide right here. Okay, so now we've gone through, we've created essentially our master records, and now how do those master records interact with the actual transactional records? So I just have a screenshot here of just a sample work order. And for those of you that are on, work orders and assemblies, you'll notice that there's a couple of new, a couple of new fields on this. So you'll notice now that I have my work order, my assembly, and now here I've incorporated my routing, my bill of materials, and if it is something that has a route associated with it, you can go through WIP. And just as a call out, you don't have, this isn't an all or nothing sort of thing. You can still exist with just assemblies, work orders and assemblies. So you can ease into this if you haven't put your toe in the water yet. So the idea is I have my work order, I've designated my route, I've designated my bill of materials, and now I've also said that it's going to go through a WIP process. So when that happens then, once the work order is approved and released to the floor, what happens then is these are the operational tasks that I mentioned earlier. So these records are now created, and based on the quantity that I had defined, you'll notice then that over here it's saying, okay, this is when it starts and ends. This is my quantity, completed quantity, my setup time, runtime. It's all adjusting based on that specific work order. All right, this is where I mentioned earlier, now that you have these data points in there, you can start to get better at analysis. So you may up to this point have just made an assumption that, oh, this job always takes whatever it is, an hour. Well, now you can actually prove it out. So you have, this is what your plan is over on the left-hand side here. This is what your actuals are over here. And you have variance that you can start tracking. And just as a call out, if this is new and you're not using this sort of stuff, initially that gut check, it's going to take a while to hash out, so make sure you give yourself enough time to gather enough data, so that way before you start going in and just wholeheartedly changing all the work that you did to get up to this point, make sure that you have the data support that change. All right, this is the other thing I just wanted to highlight. So you'll notice this is another sub-tab here, this related records. These are the different transactions that come now with a work order. So if you're familiar with like a purchase order or a sales order, the idea is very similar. You have this umbrella transaction where you can have multiple records that support it. So in the event that you have a work order, those transactions that are supporting that work order are things like the work order issue that you see there. So that's basically saying, okay, raw materials out of inventory, and they're now associated with this specific work order. You have your completions that you're going through. This is, I'm logging time against it. And then you also have your close. So now you've gone through, the team out on the floor has said this is everything that's done. Usually work order close is something that I usually advise. It's like a supervisor activity. Maybe it's at the end of the day before they leave home for the night. They're checking to make sure everybody's got their time logged, that sort of thing. And now they're going through, yep, these are the work orders that are done, and now, yep, close them out, we're completed it. All right, and so these are some of the screenshots that I just wanted to highlight. So this was back when I was talking before about costing. This is just the actual behind the scenes. So those of you that are familiar with NetSuite, this is that GL impact that you see on almost all the transactions that are in NetSuite. So this is just, I just grabbed the screenshot so you could see the impact as you're going through it. So this is the idea of, I'm taking my inventory out of stock and I'm putting it into WIP. This is, I'm logging time against it. So you'll notice how you're kind of accruing. Remember before that item that I showed you where I had time that I'm logging, or I'm sorry, I set up that item to map to a specific expense account for time. So this is where that's showing up. And then here is where it's basically showing you that last transaction where now I have everything is now done for this work order. It is now in finished goods. My finished goods now represents the actual valuation of all that work that I just did. All right, so next point, now that I've gone through and kind of described all the elements that are in play and how they come up, I just want to give you a couple of pointers and things to talk about as you're, if you're not using WIP and routing, things to just have in the back of your head so that way, if you reach out for assistance, it doesn't catch you off guard. All right, so the first one that I have here is If your company doesn't currently have this in existence, make sure that as you're going through and planning this, that you're taking the time to do so. This isn't something that if you're not doing it, you should think that tomorrow I'm going to have this all in place and everything's going to be, rainbows and unicorns. It just won't be. There's a lot of people that have to get involved and make decisions, and you also want to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to future-proof it, so that way you haven't painted yourself into a corner and it doesn't give you a chance to evolve easily. So just make sure that if you're not using it, you give yourself enough time to do so. And when I say that, I'm not saying you need to give yourself a year to make this happen, by no means. But there is going to be a little back and forth. I mean, in terms of the configuration and importing data, that's stuff that can happen with relative ease, depending on obviously the record count and things like that. However, it's going to be those back and forth internal conversations that get these procedures in place that is going to take some time. And because at the end of the day, you guys are still operating your business. You still need to make sure that your customers are happy, and it's peeling off time in the day to make this an initiative. You have to plan accordingly. This one I already mentioned before, as you're going through, giving yourself flexibility. So that way, if you want to add granularity at a later point in time, your sequencing gives you the ability to do so. The next thing that I have is usually when you hear WIP and routing and some of the benefits that you have with supply plans, just make sure again that you're giving yourself time to holistically think about how you're doing that and making sure that you have the correct default set up on your work order. So that way, if you have an expectation that when my work order is created, that it's going to help impact my demand planning. Well, the answer is yes, it can, but when you do so, you need to make sure that your work orders are in a certain status. So that way, NetSuite's picking that data up and helping you make an informed decision with demand planning. Okay, and again, this is just my last bullet point here is same thing as before. Like if you're not using WIP and routing, using demand planning does take time to incorporate. This is something that we've done presentations on this in the past. And if you're not using demand planning right now, again, it's something that you can get into and evolve. It's not an all or nothing. Usually what I advise clients if they're new to demand planning to do, kind of a similar feel, is look at like, okay, what's a really big class for me of items that, this is 80% of my sales, and I need to make sure that I get this right all the time. So I make an assumption on that one item, and you know what, for the first phase, that assumption for that primary item holds true for the other items in that class. And then once we start getting data in and we have a chance to, become more familiar, we can revise those individual items to become more accurate. All right, usually when we get to the point then that people are looking to incorporate WIP and routing, there's usually ancillary asks that come up with that. And so we have a very good exposure to allowing that to happen. And so our own dev staff, they're all located here in Wisconsin, and we've done some things that may come up with you. So the idea is, first one that I have out here is helping create lot numbers or serial numbers. So if you're familiar with that functionality in NetSuite, it's basically, okay, I am at a point where I am trying to, I have to enter this data into a field. So if I'm going through and I'm creating a finished good and I am the maker of that, and I need to automatically assign these numbers, we can use custom development to keep track of those numbers. So that way, as your team is out on the floor interacting with these records, they don't have to keep like a second spreadsheet or anything like that to do so. We can put that in the system, and it just helps with record maintenance. Next one that we have on here, I'm going to use a very generic term called suitelets to help teams interact to create NetSuite records. So for those of you that aren't familiar, suitelets are essentially a custom interface that you can do in NetSuite that for the the end user, they don't really know that it's not part of NetSuite, but it's essentially a custom process that's been incorporated into their account. And it's just a way to make it feel nice, for lack of a better term. So usually at this point where people are using WIP and routing, they are going to have more people that are out on the floor interacting with the system. Everything that I've just outlined can all be done manually. However, a lot of times people want to make sure that records are being created accurately, and there might be some checks in there to make sure that, okay, I'm using the right lot number, I'm using the right expense account. It just varies. The idea is with this, it's an interface to make it easy for the team on the floor to interact with those records, populate the natural NetSuite record. So the data is getting collected in a way that is meaningful for management, for finance, and the user on the floor has no visibility to the fact that what's being done in NetSuite, the secret sauce, as it were. Okay, next one that we usually incorporate at this point too is usually at this stage of the game, the natural bill of material usually isn't enough. Usually people, since this is a work packet that's going across multiple work centers, each work center will likely have different instructions that the team needs to find out. And in order to make that dynamic, usually for it's specific to each client, we usually incorporate an advanced PDF at this point because it's the easiest way to make that happen. So that is usually a topic of conversation that comes up at this point. And then also at this point is usually we're at a point where somebody is evolving in their manufacturing processes and they want to get better at capturing QA information, processes, instructions. So usually this is done through a variety of custom records within NetSuite, and there's usually a little bit of design that goes in because you want to have all of your data results living in a centralized location, so that way who is ever in charge of QA, they don't have to hunt all over the place to find these data points or run searches on them or get alerts on them. However, person that's in the first stage of the process, they only need to complete, maybe it's 5 fields of that. And then the next person, they need to create, the other 10, whatever it happens to be. We try to make sure that as we're going through and doing that for our clients, that we think about, okay, when this employee role is interacting with this custom record, pull up this form. So again, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for the team out on the floor to gather the data that you need to run your business and not overwhelm them with things that are going to beg 1,000 questions that they don't need to know about unless it's their direct role for the day or their direct job for the day. All right, so wrapping up, what we've gone through is I at a high level talked through some of the benefits of WIP and routing. So the idea that I just want to hit home on again there is it can help with your supply planning, helping with your replenishment process, making sure that that's good. It's going to improve on your costing side of things, making sure that that's a little bit more accurate. And then in addition, it will help with planning out on the floor because you're going to be able to start to monitor and get better at how long is it taking for things to go through your manufacturing process. Next bullet point then, we went through the elements that make up in WIP and routing. So we went through the accounting list, we went through the item, we went through all the different tasks. And then lastly, just doubling back on the common misconceptions. So biggest thing to make sure that if you're not using this right now, give yourself enough time to do so. If you're currently using demand planning and you want to have the benefits of WIP and routing impact that, again, make sure you give yourself enough time. And then also, if you have some customization that you would like to accomplish, before you go out and start buying advanced manufacturing, please just double check with us. It may be cheaper in terms of cost benefit of having GVO do some customization versus spending the money on the additional license. It's really going to be specific to your operations and your needs, and it's just a matter of having that conversation so we can give you the best advice. All right, Mark, back to you.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Jamie. That was a lot of good content. Going through the benefits, being able to see some screenshots. So there's a lot of setup, as Jamie mentioned. It's not a flip of the switch. And in general, if you guys are looking at WIP and routing and are looking for support, per usual, right? We always say this at the end, we can help, right? And you can reach out to us at NetSuite Simplified at goVirtualOffice.com if you're new to GVO. Or if you're an existing client, talk to your core contact, and we can start to look at what you guys are trying to put together for WIP and routing and start to scope it out. So we've got a couple other slides here that we're going to go through and then open it up to questions. So if you do have questions, definitely pop into the GoToWebinar. If we don't have any questions, I might have a couple for Jamie, and then we can end early and give people time back in their day. Second last slide here, what's up next? So we are pivoting a little bit from the world of manufacturing, and we're stepping into a little bit more of data-driven loyalty. And we have 2 companies that we work with that are excellent at what they do. They're very honed in, locked in, and that's Tadpole and Annex Cloud. Again, they're going to be able to step through, and we're going to work with them in the next webinar to talk about loyalty programs, utilizing first-party data, and just doing more with less. So If you have someone on your team from a marketing standpoint or from a merchandising standpoint, this is an excellent webinar to learn from. And even if you're outside of that and you're just looking to understand what are some of the trends that your potential competitors are trying to pick up to get advanced, bring in more sales, be able to understand your data better on the sales side, this is will be a great webinar for you to attend to. So highly recommend it. And again, we're having two of our friends jump on the call with us next month. And the timing of that, let me just grab the timing for that. That is going to be on May 19th at 10 a.m. Central. So, and again, we do record all these. So if you're not able to attend it, look for the recording afterwards. It'll definitely be very valuable. So that being said, let's talk about Boost for a moment. I mentioned this at the beginning. This is our managed application consulting. And what does that mean? So for those that are working with us, it's an enhancement from what we do today, trying to be more business first, use that industry experience and layer that on at the beginning and do annual strategic planning. Now, if you're outside of GVO and you're looking at your support options, there's a few different options that are out there in the world today, right? You can hire an administrator or administrators that have NetSuite experience. You can hire someone to do support desk, more reactive work, or you can look at something that's more on the managed side, something that we're pushing to get into with Boost. And obviously hiring administrators, it can be expensive, right? Full-time employees with benefits, it adds up. Those that are in the support desk realm too, it's very reactive based. You call up and then they try to help, and sometimes impersonal to some degree from that support standpoint. So in the transition to Boost, we're looking to have named support from senior level consultants. For those of you guys that were on the webinar previous, Renee is going to be one of our managers in the Boost program, and also proactive. That's a huge call out. A lot of support today is very reactive. You get a call and you call in for the support and it's someone taking their time to dig into the issue and then get back to you, and it's reactive. It's not strategic. It's not aligning to what your business strategies are. And so one of the key benefits, amongst a ton of other things, is that we are going to be annually doing an intake process where we look at your business strategies. We work hand in hand with you and we plan out the year, right? And that's something that is extremely necessary. When you think of all the things that you're fighting against industry changes. You're being pushed to grow your business, and you're also being pushed to stay on top of tech, right? Incredibly difficult, right? NetSuite has 2 releases each year. There's a lot within those release notes. How do you manage it all and stay on top of it and advance where you are today? So that is the whole point of Boost, right? You can either do the reactive support, which is the curve that loops down. It only can get you to a certain point, or from a Boost standpoint, being able to have that proactive sense where you're actually doing strategic evaluations at the beginning of each year and being able to understand what you can do to really hit your goals and be intentional about it. And that's the kind of the rocket that keeps going up and up. So again, that's a little bit more about Boost. We've got a lot of more details that we'll be reaching out to our current clients. If you're hearing that for the first time, completely understand. You've probably got a lot of questions. We are going to be reaching out to everyone individually to talk through that. And then Jamie, obviously super excited to get to his memes. Go for it, Jamie. You can explain these ones. I'm going to look at the questions.
Well, no, we're back at Devo. So, it's all about WIP. And then obviously Mike Judge is a genius. So you got to love Office Space.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I'm looking at, it doesn't look like we've got questions from the group here, but I've got a couple of things, Jamie, that were scenario based.
Yep.
One of them was, if you have multiple facilities that are producing the same product, what's kind of the strategy if you've got different equipment at both facilities and you're trying to have this, same outcome? How do you manage that with WIP and routing in NetSuite?
Yep. So that was when I touched on it. I showed on that one slide where you have essentially your location setting on your routing, And again, essentially, you just need to create those underlying records to show the difference in equipment. And that same bill of material can be run in different locations with different routing. So again, it can be very specific by location, especially if you're a manufacturer with multiple locations. You might not have the same equipment, but your customer doesn't care. Just show me, give me my end good, regardless of who's making it.
Gotcha. Okay. Then just a couple other ones that come up often. I know, if you're new to WIP and routing and you're just trying to start it, oftentimes when we jump into projects, we're always looking to set a specific owner for that project work. How do you go about that? Where do you start?
If I were to advise anybody that's given us a buzz, people that I feel like should be on that call or on that team within your organization, obviously include your finance team to make sure that they're getting their feedback in there in terms of make sure that you're mapping to these accounts. This is what I feel like you should have your overheads set to be, so that you need that input. Usually then I'd also advise to talk to your design and engineering team. Usually you have a couple people that are making your prototypes, figuring out how to set it up, and you're gonna have to figure out, are they the ones that are determining this is the routing that you're gonna need to take this through? More often than not, they're more experienced staff. They know your equipment, they know how it runs, so they're probably gonna be that person. And then if it's not that person, then make sure that you're also incorporating your supervisor on the floor, because they're the ones that are helping rubber meet the road and making sure that their team adopts it, ensures that they're creating the records that all the front office thinks is a great idea. They're the ones making sure that people on the floor are actually doing what you're asking them to do.
All right. Yeah, exactly. Getting the multiple departments involved that are going to be impacted. As Jamie showed, there's the operation side all the way down to those that are on the floor, actually doing at the work center, versus those that are from a financial side looking at the GL impact. It's all tied together. So the last question that I've got is really when you have simultaneous jobs that run together, or simultaneous steps within a specific work order. How do you process that?
So NetSuite's really good at kind of doing that one-to-one relationship. So I have this work order, I'm completing it. It's not really designed to do a blend of that. And where we've encountered this in the past is we have clients that there's one step where they'll run multiple work orders together because it's more efficient. So a use case might be okay, I have a paint booth, and I need to maximize how much I'm putting through that booth, and I don't want to change over my ink or colors every time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do all of my green doors all at once, and then I'll switch over and I'll do all my red doors after that. And so this is where, when I was mentioning that SuiteLit, this is where we make that interface for the team easy to make that work order completion. So behind the scenes, everything is getting captured as you want. You're allocating time, you're making sure you're capturing cost, but the team on the floor doesn't have to go through and click, maybe it's 20 work orders to do that one step for themselves. They could, but it's probably more cost effective just to spend the money on the development to make that happen.
Got it. Okay. So getting a developed user interface helps streamline some of that work and to ultimately give you efficiency. So you're not having to step into each one of those work orders or try to follow a process that's not mostly effective from an operations side. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Well, I'm going to take a look here. It doesn't look like we have any questions from the group. That's okay. If we end this webinar early, like I think we are going to, and you walk away and you have a question that pops in your head, just reach out to us. We're happy to help and happy to be able to provide you guys support. And we appreciate it every time. It's really great to see some familiar faces in the list too as well. So take care, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Thank you, everyone.